Have you ever just stopped and thought, what if one tiny thing in the past had gone differently? How different would your life be? Or, the entire world? Well, in Jayant Narlikar's amazing story, The Adventure, we get to see exactly that play out. So let's dive into this mind-bending journey where history is definitely not what you remember. I mean, just think about it. One bullet that misses its target, a single leader who survives a battle they were supposed to lose. Could a moment that small really be enough to completely change the destiny of a whole nation? Well, that is the exact question at the heart of this story. And believe me, the answer is way more shocking than you'd think. So let me introduce you to our protagonist, Professor Gangadharpant Gaitonde. He's a historian, and he's on a train called the Jijamata Express, heading to Bombay, a city he knows like the back of his hand. But as the train chugs along, he starts to get this weird feeling, this nagging sense that he's heading somewhere that's familiar but also just deeply, fundamentally wrong. The clues start small, but they add up. He notices the train carriages aren't from Indian railways. Nope, they belong to something called the Greater Bombay Metropolitan Railway, and each one has a tiny Union Jack painted on it. An Anglo-Indian ticket checker, British officers. Then someone mentions this is where the British Raj begins, and they need to check permits. These aren't just little details, they're huge red flags telling him that in this world, the British never left. Okay, so Professor Gaitonde finally steps out of the Victoria Terminus into this alternate Bombay. He's trying to brace himself, right? He's trying to make sense of everything he's seen so far. But absolutely nothing could have prepared him for what was waiting for him right outside that station. And there it is, East India House, the headquarters of the East India Company. I mean, come on, that's a name that should be in a history book, a company that was dissolved way back after 1857, but here it is, standing right in front of him, not as a dusty old museum, but as a thriving, powerful headquarters. So we're not talking about a little tweak to history here. This is a completely different path. The real question is, how and when did it all change? For a historian like Professor Gaitonde, there's really only one thing to do. He's got to get to a library, right? He needs to find the history books in this world to figure out this massive riddle and pinpoint the exact moment where his reality split from this one. So he gets to the library, and in this totally surreal moment, he finds his own 5-volume history of India sitting on the shelf. Can you imagine? He opens the first volume, the history of Ashoka, Samudragupta, all the way up to the death of Aurangzeb. It's all identical. It's exactly what he wrote, exactly as he remembers it. So history was stable, up to a point. And then he gets to the last volume, and that's where he finds it, the change, the fork in the road. It wasn't 1857, it was way earlier. The book describes a totally different outcome for one single crucial battle, the Third Battle of Panipat. This was the moment everything went sideways. So what on earth happened in this alternate version of the Battle of Panipat? What was this event that was so huge that it kept the East India Company in power and basically reshaped the entire Indian subcontinent for centuries? You're not going to believe how small it was. In this world's history books, the Marathas didn't lose at Panipat. They won. And it wasn't even close. It was a decisive victory. This win cemented Maratha power across northern India, and it completely stopped the East India Company's plans for expansion in their tracks. In this timeline, India developed on its own terms, a strong, proud nation that never fell under colonial rule. But the big question is still there. How? How did they win? So the professor keeps digging. He finds this old chronicle, a Bakhyard, which is a kind of historical narrative that he usually doesn't trust because they can be a bit embellished. But buried deep inside all the flowery language, he finds it. He calls it the germ of truth, one tiny little detail that explains everything. And here it is. This is the whole thing. In our world, our reality, the Maratha leader Vishwasrao was hit and killed by a bullet, and that just crushed the army's morale. But in the world the professor visited, the bullet misses. It just brushes past his ear. Vishwasrao survives, and that one tiny event acts as a massive morale boost, turning the tide of the battle, and with it, the entire course of history. Unbelievable. So, after getting pretty violently ejected from that alternate world, the professor finds himself back in his own reality. The first thing he does is go tell this incredible story to his scientist friend, Rajendra Deshpande. And this is where we shift gears, from the historical what if to the scientific how is this even possible?
Rajendra's first idea is something called catastrophe theory. It's basically a scientific way of saying that a tiny, almost insignificant change can trigger a sudden, massive shift in the final outcome. The Battle of Panipat is a perfect example, right? The survival or death of one leader, that's the small variable, led to two completely different, catastrophic outcomes for the war and for India.
But okay, that only explains how history could have been different, not how the professor actually experienced it. For that, Rajendra brings in his second point, quantum theory. Think about it like this. If you fire a bullet from a gun, you can predict its path. But an electron? You can't. It can exist in multiple states, in multiple locations, all at the same time. So the wild implication here is, maybe reality itself can exist in multiple states too. So Rajendra puts it all together for him. First, he says, a catastrophic event like that battle creates a fork in the road, different potential realities. Second, quantum theory suggests that all of those alternate realities might actually exist, all at the same time. The catch? We, as observers, can only ever see one of them at a time. But somehow, Professor Gaitonde made a transition. He didn't just see another path, he actually jumped the tracks and experienced another world. And that leads us to this absolutely staggering conclusion about the world we live in. We aren't just living out the one and only version of history. We might be living in just one of a potentially infinite number of parallel worlds, each one created by a different choice, a different outcome, at some point in time. And this is the key takeaway. Rajendra makes it super clear. The professor did not time travel. He didn't go back to the 18th century. He was always in the present day. He was just experiencing the present day of a different world, a world that branched off from ours at the Battle of Panipat. But this still leaves one last, massive question hanging in the air. Why him? Why did this happen to Professor Gaitonde? What on earth could possibly trigger such an insane leap between two different realities? Rajendra has a guess. Just before all this happened, Professor Gaitonde was in a serious accident, a collision with a truck. And at that exact moment of impact, what was he thinking about? Catastrophe theory and how it applied to the Battle of Panipat. Rajendra thinks it was this perfect storm, the intense physical trauma, combined with his brain being laser-focused on that specific historical pivot point that caused the neurons in his brain to act as a trigger, and for a moment, allowed him to transition. So Professor Gaitonde's adventure wasn't a trip through time, but a journey between worlds. It was a glimpse into a world that so easily could have been. And it really makes you think, doesn't it, about the world you're sitting in right now. If one single bullet can redraw the map of a continent, what seemingly small decision, what chance meeting, or what missed bus set the unchangeable course for the reality that you call your own?